Welcome to A Call to Healing. I'm your host, Melanie McDaniel. This podcast is dedicated to the stories that are raw and unfiltered. Today's conversation is with Juan Aguilera, a jiu-jitsu black belt who battled 17 years of opioid addiction before discovering Ibogaine. Now Juan is a medicine facilitator on a mission serving veterans and first responders with the sacred medicine Bufo. A Call to Healing is sponsored by Senavida, a platform helping practitioners spend more time in service and less time in the back office. Hey there, Juan. Thanks for being on A Call to Healing.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yes, so Juan Aguilera is a friend of mine, a new friend of mine, and has a pretty amazing story. So we'll start there. Do you mind sharing a bit about who Juan is, where you came from?
Where I came from? Oof. All right, let's see. So I was born in California, Los Angeles, California. Both my parents are from Santiago, Chile. So after I was born, they actually moved back to Chile. So my first 7 years of life was in Chile. They migrated back or came back to the States, and I've been a California boy ever since.
I know there's a bit more to your childhood story, leading to where you are now, holding medicine and helping others heal. So what kind of, in that childhood, being maybe, what do we call you? What do you consider your culture?
I don't know. I feel more American, I guess you would say, because, it's like majority of my life was spent in the States, right? But I certainly have a lot of memory back from, those initial years in Chile. But yeah, culturally, I'd say I'm more like American. I was raised in California primarily. And, just thinking back, what comes up for me right now is, I didn't know it was this at that time. But now I certainly know I'm more educated on some of the things that were going on with me, growing up early on. It seemed I had this like heavy pain in my chest, like throughout my entire childhood, right? And it was very discomforting. And it seemed to follow me around in my day-to-day life. If anything, I was just normalizing it. I had no idea where it was coming from. It just existed in me. I had an older brother. He was a half-brother who was a professional Muay Thai fighter. And I had gravitated towards martial arts at a very young age. I have like memories like my middle brother and I, and by the way, I very much looked up to John, was his name. So Juan, John, anyways. So John was a professional Muay Thai fighter. My middle brother, Gerardo, him and I, we very much looked up to him. He was very involved early on in our life. And when we were kids, Gerardo and I had this joke because all our friends, they were watching cartoons when they were kids, and John was having us watch like Bloodsport and Kickboxer with Jean-Claude Van Damme. So we were very into martial arts, and he was showing us all these very incredible films early on. So yeah, that's why I gravitated towards it, and because I was inspired by him. I got introduced to martial arts through him, and I had found this very beautiful relief, to that discomfort that I was feeling. But it was very temporary, right? It was as if you go work out, you have this sense of euphoria after. And for me, it was very short-lived, right? So I had this exceptional outlet, but then again, it was that lingering, knot heaviness would creep back up. And, now I know it was this very heavy anxiety, right? And I, along, that journey, I was, staying very disciplined with training. I started off, my father, he was very into boxing, so I got into boxing at an early age. And then ultimately what happened, somewhere along the way, I can't recall exactly if it was an injury that I sustained in training or perhaps it was a surgery, but I had gotten prescribed prescription opioids. And, I have this very clear memory of when I got this prescription, I believe my mother was in the room as well. And there wasn't any forewarning to my mother, who's not from here, who's not educated on prescription opioids whatsoever. I was prescribed however many, I believe it may have been Vicodin, but anyways. And I remember I got the prescription, I had it in my room, it wasn't being monitored. From my recollection, she wasn't informed on anything of that nature. So I had this bottle of opiates in my room, and I just started taking them. And I remember being, in this room at my parents' house. I must have been 13, 14 years old at the time. and I was just eating them, and really just unaware of what I was doing. I was just enjoying it. I just felt good, right? Beyond just like whatever it was doing to me physically, it just seemed to numb everything out. And I remember I was so oblivious to what I was doing when I went back to the doctors for a checkup or a follow-up. I remember asking him just flat out, like, hey, could I get another prescription? And he put a pause to it right there. So that was, I would say, the introduction to something to soothe that discomfort outside of training. And basically, what started recreationally as I got older, they became very accessible, especially at that time. You know, they were just everywhere, it seemed, right? It wasn't hard to find, and it became a thing where, like, hey, whenever they would come around, I'd be open to doing it, right? And then 17 years, 16 years, 15 years down the road, it became a full-blown addiction where I was, you know, ultimately ended up, you know, abusing fentanyl as well. So that's kind of how this opiate addiction started for me, as a result of a prescription. And strangely enough, I had this combination of, like, I was very disciplined in martial arts, right? Like, I was showing up, and, you know, I could dive into that a little bit more, but I was, you know, training, I was boxing, then I got, like, the MMA scene thing, you know, was growing, and then I got into Muay Thai, and then I was introduced to jiu-jitsu. So I had this combination of this, like, worsening addiction, but at the same time, I was, like, excelling in martial arts where I was competing, and I was managing both for a very long time. And it's hard for me to pinpoint exactly why this took place, but after I received the black belt, it seemed that the priority became opiates and not martial arts anymore, right? Perhaps in my mind, I felt like I had accomplished, you know, whatever I was aspiring to accomplish in jiu-jitsu, and then it just, you know, it really took a deep dive from there. And then years pass. When you're using opiates and you're abusing substances, is like you're numb to your reality, right? So I'm like numbing out the fact that I'm not training, but I'm not caring at the same time. And then a year passes, 2 years passes, and then I'm realizing, fuck, I just let 2 years pass and I'm not taking advantage. You know, it's like I have to play catch up to get to, because I had all these aspirations to become pursue a career in martial arts or jiu-jitsu, because I believed I had a lot of potential. But when you're in training and you're actively, if you're a martial artist, you know, it's interestingly enough, showing up to train is probably one of the easiest parts of that path. And it's your life outside of the academy, outside of the jiu-jitsu gym, whatever it is the true challenge. And that's where I fell short my entire life. So in ways, like, I had all these aspirations to pursue this path in training and becoming whatever it was that I was envisioning myself to be. But in ways I was very much lying to myself, because I had this thing outside of it, that outside of the academy, that was really just killing me, destroying my body, right? And those combinations that combination of living only lasts so long. So the priority became opiates, and then that turned into, you know, an addiction that started off recreationally, and it became my day-to-day cycle of life where all I cared about was opiates. It came before everything in my life: relationships, friendships, social settings, everything. Like, if it didn't have that involved, it wasn't happening. I became completely dependent on opiates.
So before we get to the healing part, because I know you get there, I want to, if there's anybody listening that might have an addiction that is completely unaware, what are some of the signs, or you said you were unaware, but looking back, what are some of the signs people can maybe look at in their own life that might be a signal that there's an addiction going on?
Yeah, I don't think addictions have to be substance related, right? It could be a porn addiction, sex addiction, psychological addiction. So a symptom or a sign for me is anything that you know is causing you harm, but you're continuing to do it personally, right? So, and you can't stop, right? So it's like, even if you can stop and break the cycle, like I had many times over, if you get that itch and that craving and you fall back into it, truly knowing that this is damaging you, that to me is a sign, a clear sign, right? So your inability to live without whatever is carrying you through, whatever coping mechanisms that you're using to, you know, whether that's substance related or not. So that to me is a clear sign.
And I imagine it's
more than just it's work, it's relationships, it's following your dreams or not having them, or I mean, it's your whole life, I imagine.
Mm-hmm.
Like signs can
Yeah.
be anywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, 100%. Right. Like for me, it was that as well as like, me taking, like me not being open to doing anything unless I was high. Right. Like things like that, of course, as well. So yeah, I agree.
Have anybody saying anything to you? Any loved ones that were expressing concern?
No, so I kept it hidden. I was very efficient at that. And when I have the memory I have is me, the first person I opened up to was Gerardo, my middle brother. And I remember his reaction was so in ways shocked, perhaps, because he's like, how? He's like, dude, you're like this like athletic dude that's, excels in like anything you do, like martial arts related and other areas of my life as well. But that was the only thing, that was my identity. I think it got to a point where I really just like, and this for me personally applies to anyone. It's like, you're not ready until you're ready, and you're not going to stop until you're ready, right? So I guess, yeah, you could refer to it as rock bottom. I feel like in my life, I hit many rock bottoms, but I just still didn't want it enough, right? Yeah, so just dragged out for however many, years. I'd say like from start to when I actually like put it behind me was about 17 years more or less. So yeah, throughout that time, I was able to stop. Like I was in this cycle, right? I would go through these cycles where I was able to stop, but then I'd fall back because when you're actively abusing opiates, and I specifically say this, but I think it could apply to many different, right? But for me, opiates, it's like I'm numbing my reality, right? So it didn't, when I was in those moments of, getting high, I guess you would say, like I wasn't aware of like anything beyond that. So what ended up happening for me is like I was able to break that cycle, go through a very like heavy withdrawal, like physical withdrawal symptoms, and I'd be able to stay clean for like maybe 3 weeks, more or less, like who knows. But I'd fall right back to opiates because that lingering depression, like whatever damage is being done throughout the addiction, like that's what was fueling my addiction, right? Was my inability and like courage to be able to just like go through that heaviness, that depression that I was like suppressing so, well through the use of opiates. So from time to time, I'd be able to break the cycle, and then I was exploring like conventional forms of treatment, like rehabs. I overdosed when I was younger, and I got admitted into a hospital, and that didn't do it for me. Conventional rehabs, the accessible like medications that they offer, such as Suboxone and things of that nature. I had a very addictive personality, so anything that I learned about that could help in terms of like conventional options that most people are aware of, like Suboxone, I'll use that, and Kratom, I'll get into that. It all just became a replacement for me until I was able to find opiates. And then that became Kratom. So like when I found out about Kratom, and if I'm jumping around, just let me know. But like when I found out about Kratom, I found out about it as an alternative to get off of opiates, right? And I remember when I first tried Kratom, I was filled with excitement because when I did it, I'm like, I can't believe this shit is legal, right? So like truly that was my response to myself. And I'm like, I could use this to get off of opiates, great. And then I became addicted to Kratom. I wasn't having success with anything substance related in terms of like those types of alternatives, right? Because for me, it's like what sobriety and success looked like for me in terms of healing was a life free from all substances, to be able to cope with my day-to-day life, to be able to live in my reality without having the need to resort to something outside of myself, right? And anything that was available to me at that time was just a replacement to what I was already taking. After I started exhausting like all these different conventional options, I was watching the Joe Rogan podcast, and they're talking about Ibogaine, right? And it's so I find out about Ibogaine, and all I'm hearing about is this psychedelic. And to this point in my life, I had never done a psychedelic. Like I had definitely experienced like narcotics, right? But nothing psychedelic. And not necessarily that I was against them, but I was kind of like conditioned to believe like I had all this fear about them because I'm like, that's going to make me go crazy. And considering like everything that I was, anyways, I'll get to that. But yeah, so I had this like narrative created in my mind about psychedelics. But then I hear like when you're in a point of such pure desperation, you're willing to try anything, right? So I go, I find out about Ibogaine on the Joe Rogan podcast, watching the Joe Rogan podcast, and then like, at this time there was a lot of awareness on how effective it is specifically dealing with opiate addiction, right? So I immediately Googled a couple clinics down in Mexico, and a week, maybe 2 weeks later, I was at a clinic, right? And at this time, like this place that I went to was very, unfortunately, I'm not going to say the name because I don't know if they exist and I don't want to throw shade on them, but like it was a very rundown operation, right? Like it was very sketchy. Like I get down there and then I find out that they're not going to do the treatment at the actual facility that I arrived to, that they're taking us to some neighborhood that's like in the middle of wherever. And it was a sketchy neighborhood on top of a sketchy operation. And I remember I get to this facility, we're about to do the treatment, and mind you, like when I went to this place, like there wasn't any preparation, I didn't even know what like integration, none of that stuff was existent, like at this place at least that I went to. So I just went into it blindly. I'm like, hey, I heard this shit works, so I'm going to go down there and do it, right? I've tried everything else, so I have nothing else to lose. I feel like if this continues on with what I'm doing back home, I'm just going to end up dying anyways, right? So I'm in this room with this other participant, and they're administering the medicine. And there was a kid apparently that got hit by a car, like in the neighborhood, and they bring this kid into this, like it was like this small house that was converted into a clinic where we were doing the Ibogaine at, where we were doing the medicine. And they just administered the medicine to me, Ibogaine, and I hear this kid screaming at the top of his lungs. So they're treating other patients that have nothing to do with what we're doing there. So the whole thing was just frightening. It was like I was anxiety ridden just about the whole setting of it, right? I had there were some very minor hallucinations, like visions for me in this experience. And I was like vomiting the whole night, purging, like it was very rough, physically rough on me. But I remember I woke up that next morning and I was just in physically bad shape, right? Like, they had us stuck at this place like the whole day, and I'm like getting on the staff like, dude, you need to get me the fuck out of here and bring me back to this house that I arrived to. So I kept like getting on them, and they transported me and the other participants back to the house. And I realized like I wasn't craving opiates, right? And it felt wonderful. And I couldn't believe it. I was blown away, right? And it did what I intended it to do, what I was hoping for it to do, right? It brought me to a place where I feel like, God, like I haven't tapped into this probably since I was like introduced to opiates, to be honest with you. And it was beautiful. And I remember like at the end of that week, I also did Bufo, 5-MeO DMT. It was a very profound experience. So I end up going home after, right? And I go home, and again, long story, no real guidance on what to do next. So I just kind of went back to my similar environment. I started drinking. I had a very unique job opportunity come up for me. I started working with this guy that I really believed that I had a future with his company. And, I started drinking with this guy regularly, and I ended up relapsing about 2-3 months after. There's a lot more to that story, but like I ended up relapsing, and the addiction got worse because I was making all this money, right? I felt as if like no one had told me like, hey, don't drink, don't do any, like, it was just like, hey, see you later. So I go home and I'm like back to drinking, and it lasted for however long. I woke up, and then immediately I fell back into opiates. And now I had the idea that like I went and did this incredible thing, right? This like remarkable thing that I was not going to consider doing again because of how intense it was. And I felt like I failed, right? So I had that weighing on me. I'm like, there's no way I'm ever going to fix this situation. I had a few legitimate people that I knew that were illegally selling me their prescriptions, I guess you would say, right? They were selling me their prescriptions, and the addiction was worsening. And then eventually what happened is, like, you run through your legitimate sources, because I didn't want to fall into fentanyl, and I never thought that I would. And eventually, when you can't get what you need, you'll do anything, right, to avoid the withdrawal. So then that's kind of what trickled into me doing fentanyl. So I was making money. I had nothing to show for it because it was all going to my addiction. And I was like, you know what? I had such a profound experience with, well, not a profound, it was a terrible experience, but, you know, it did wonders for me. So I kept having the idea of going to do ayahuasca. So I booked a trip to go do ayahuasca. I was in the Amazon jungle for 2 weeks. I got myself clean. I just like forced myself to stop. And I went through this like grueling, like withdrawal, withdrawal period. And then I go do ayahuasca, down there for 2 weeks, and sat with the medicine about 7 times, I believe. Yeah, 7 times. And it was a beautiful experience, but it wasn't life-changing for me. It's like I'm still like in this cycle of addiction, right? So perhaps I'm not deriving the most out of this experience, right? And yeah, so I'm not deriving the most for that reason. And so I came home, and it was, you know, beautiful. It was profound, I guess you would say. There was some certainly like highlight things I took away from it, but it wasn't life-changing or life-saving for me. So perhaps my perception was flawed as well, because I'm expecting like medicine to just do it all for me as well. Another unique thing happened in my life. I started another career, I guess, job opportunity happened, and making all this money. And again, I was like very short-lived, like success, like for me personally, after that after that ayahuasca trip, and I'm back to using opiates, and it's just getting worse and worse. I remember I was so entrapped by this addiction that I like had finally found opiates. And I remember I had lived like in this very nice complex, and the possibility of someone breaking into the home that I lived in, the apartment, was probably zero. But I was so entrapped that I remember when I got my hands finally, after like a day of searching, like just anyone I could think of, like it was so wild. Like I would go through the conversations that the people I would reach out to, they were probably like, what the fuck is this guy, like, you know, like, but in my head, I just didn't care. I had no shame. I was like, well, and I'd give these sob stories like, it's for my brother, like just these crazy stories that I would come up with to try to get them. And I remember at the end of this day, I finally had them, and I was so worried and concerned that someone was going to break into my apartment. I remember I slid them into my pillowcase, just so I knew that they were right above my head, because I was worried about the thought of someone breaking into my place and stealing them from me. It's crazy, because that was never going to happen. So yeah, I'm again, probably the worst it's ever been. I was like, you know what, I need to do Ibogaine again, because that's the only thing I've done that got me to a place where I was so in the idea of going through that grueling experience again. It was just like, who cares at this point, because I was gonna fucking die, and I was like considering taking my own life many times over, suicidal ideations. I was I was wrapped up in the cannabis industry on the black market side of it. And I remember, you know, a friend of mine, he had left a gun in my car, and I'm like, all kinds of thoughts were running through my head. And I'm just like, you know what? Like, I need to do something, or else, you know, I'm going to end up on the street, you know, for sure, or I'm going to die. And I had considered doing Ibogaine again, but I was set that I wasn't going to do it in Mexico. So I don't know how I stumbled upon this, but I was on YouTube, and this video came up on this guy who's been on the Joe Rogan podcast multiple times. His name's Chris Bell. Chris had documented his Ibogaine experience in the States. It's like a 15-minute short film called Ibogaines with a Z at the end. And he's documenting this experience of him doing it, I believe, in Colorado. So I'm like, I had this wild idea that I'm going to reach out to this guy on Instagram, and hopefully he'll get back to me. So I go on Instagram, and the guy has like 100,000 or whatever followers, and I'm like, there's no way he's going to get back to me. And I wrote him this whole thing, like a direct message, explaining like my story, what led me to wanting to message him, how I'd done Ibogaine before, but my experience down there was horrific, so I wanted to do it in a comforting setting. Is there any way that he could connect me with this guy that he did it with in the States? wrote me back in 20 minutes on Instagram. And he's like, hey, I already let the dude know that you're going to hit him up. So feel free to reach out to him. He's waiting for your message. And I said, okay. So I messaged the guy immediately. We start talking, and he bounced the idea right then and there. He's like, yeah, come out to Boston and I'll do this treatment for you at my home. I said, okay. And if you know addicts, they don't give a shit about getting clean when they're high, only when they can't get high. So what ended up happening is I'm going in this like back and forth where this guy spent so much time with me on the phone to hear me crying. Like, man, I want my life back. Like I was this athlete. Like I let all my dreams slip right through my finger. I'm like so broken. And, it got to the point where we're just going back and forth. He's like, when are you going to come? When are you going to come? And anyways, I ended up blocking him because I got to the point where I was so ashamed. I was like, this guy's not even going to take me seriously anymore, right? Because I'm just like not pulling the trigger. He spent so graciously all this time with me to talk to me as a friend, as a brother. And I'm just not, I'm just stuck. And, the timing on how this happened, it was about 3 or 4 days before my birthday. I had a call from a block number, and I was on my way to go get opiates. And I answered the call, not thinking I was just like, who the fuck is calling me? So he calls me, and it's like, why are you blocking my number, kid? And he has this thick Boston accent. And I was like, he got me. And I'm like, dude, I'm so ashamed. I'm like, and I told him I was like about to go get, more opiates. And he's like, man, why are you going to do that? It's like, dude, you're young. Like, you got your life ahead of you. Why don't you, you could come here. You have nothing to lose and go right back to drug use if you want, or you could give this one more shot. He's like, I promise, I believe it'll be different. Because when I went to that first clinic, I think this is important to note. I remember they were giving me opiates on the day of Ibogaine treatment to mitigate the withdrawals. So they were giving me methadone. So I think in ways that may have numbed some of the effects, perhaps. They were feeding me a ton of food. I was super nauseous. He's like, dude, do things differently, and I'm confident you'll have a different outcome. Timing couldn't have been more perfect. Literally the next day I got on a flight to Boston. And I fly to Boston, and I remember it was the most grueling 5-hour flight of my life. I was withdrawing, sweating, shaking. I had to go to the bathroom to vomit. It was terrible. I just never got to Boston. It was like Boston was never getting closer on that flight. And I remember I get there. He picks me up. We go to Whole Foods. I'm like, why didn't you go to Whole Foods? I wanted to start the treatment as soon as because I felt so terrible. And this guy's taking me to Whole Foods. I'm like, dude, why didn't you do this before I got here? He wanted to go get fruit and a bunch of stuff. Anyways, we get to the house. We start. He administers the medicine, and I didn't have any music. A lot of clinics put music on for the Ibogaine experience. I didn't have any music. He put me in a dark room with a bunch of Ibogaine and my thoughts and nothing else. And what I can say, it was the most profoundly intense, visionary experience that I ever had in my life. To this point, it was terrifying. It was painful. I remember he walked in to give me, when you work with Ibogaine, it's given gradually in doses, right? Generally, I don't believe anyone should be doing it all at once. But anyways, who cares? I was giving it to it gradually in this setting. And I remember he came to give me this last dose. And I told him, dude, I can't. And he's like, trust me, just do this last dose. I remember I took it. And anyways, I could talk about that if you'd like. But anyways, I remember I come out of that. The following morning, I'm coming out of it. The medicine's subsiding. I'm coming to. The visions are kind of fading off. I had this intense buzzing that was beginning to die down. And I remember I got myself out of that bed and it's a strange thing to say, right? Because I had done it once already, but the first thought that came to my head was like I felt as if I was robbed of something I should have received much earlier in my life. That was the first thought that came to me. And I remember I walked myself to the bathroom and I just started crying like intensely. And he had told me this later. He's like, I was going to go in there to make sure you're all right, but he just let me be. And I just started crying and weeping because of everything that I saw during my experience. It was so heavy. And I went back to my room after I showered. And it became so clear, like the anxiety, everything, that the way I was, the way I viewed myself with such, disbelief. I was sexually abused as a kid, right? I had endured several instances that I was sexually abused as a kid. I grew up, I want to say this very carefully because I love my parents to death. I do. So they need to know that if this ever comes around their way. But I grew up in probably one of the most physically violent households that I know of. In my circle of people in my life, like, it was horrific. And I had this very interesting thing where it's like, I was working at an Ibogaine clinic, and week after week, I was running one of these centers, and I would hear, I was hosting about 6 people per week, and every week I would hear about people talking about how they don't remember their childhood. And I'm like, how do you not remember your childhood? I remember so much from my childhood, right? So I found it this very intriguing thing that I would hear all the time. And then I had hosted a retreat. Again, I'm fast forwarding a lot, but I hosted this retreat, and I remember it was a veteran that was attending this retreat, and he had shared something so interesting. He's like, can any of you remember a childhood memory that wasn't tied to something negative? And I realized in that moment that I can't. That all my childhood memories of growing up, and I hate saying it because it pains me because I love my family, but it's the reality. It's I don't remember anything that was just pure happiness and joy. I really have to work hard to think of something that was just that, but I could think of the bad like this, that impacted me severely, clearly. So yeah, I got up after Ibogaine, that day, and that was a clear day. I received that message so clearly, and I became fucking angry at those substances. I'm never gonna let you fucking take another day from me. And May 27th of this year marked 3 years, and there's completely eliminated my desire to ever use again. I didn't drink after. I didn't associate myself with anything that would entice me or trigger me to want to do anything that could harm me. I prioritized my sobriety over anything for the first year post that treatment. And I fueled my desire for that as if with the same fuel or desire that I had for using opiates. I redirected that into leading me into a direction that was positive and productive for me, looked like.
With your second Ibogaine, did you do Bufo or Senavida with that one?
No.
So we'll fast forward to what you do now, because I know that's the medicine that you carry, but you also take groups down to an Ibogaine facility in Mexico. So why do you serve Bufo?
So, again, backtracking. So I think when I did Ibogaine the first time, they were giving me methadone. So I feel like I never fully derived entirely the benefits of anything that I was doing, because I was always in this cycle addiction. I never walked into anything else man, I am completely substance free for a significant amount of time. It was always walking into it with some type of, the difference was with the second Ibogaine treatment, I didn't do any opiates that day that I did it, but I had, it's hard to explain, right? Because I was able to get short-acting opiates. So when I did Ibogaine the second time, it perhaps cleared out of my system much more effectively. Maybe the fact that I had fasted, so maybe the body, maybe it was just what was meant to happen on the day. Who knows? But why Bufo is because after I had done Ibogaine that second time, I was in the room. This guy's name is Jim, and I was sitting at his table, his dining table, and I was like, man, I am so fucking scared to go back home because I don't want to fuck this up. And he was such, like, I really bonded with this dude, and I felt he had a lot of love for me. And I know he does. And what ended up happening is I told him, like, dude, is there any way that I could just stay here? I'll work for you for free. He's like, I got a line of people out the door. It's like, I want to just help you do this. Like, I don't want to go back home. There's nothing for me at home except violence, like just problems. And he's like, you're always raving about, he used to call Bufo Bufa with his like thick Boston accent. He's like, man, you're always raving about the Bufa. It's like, why don't you go learn how to do that? And then you can, go learn how to do that, and you can come back to Boston, and I'll do the Ibogaine and you do Bufa. And in that moment, I'm like filled with such clarity. I'm like, fuck, why not? Like, I love that medicine. Like, I've had exceptional experiences with that medicine, and I was fucking hungry at that point, and I was willing to do anything. So I'm like, you know what? Done. I'm not going to question it. I'm just going to go. So I go back home, and basically I had been in search of a facilitator. And I had reached out to the first facilitator I ever worked with after that the first guy that provided me Bufo. And you learn quickly, ever since from the moment I decided to want to pursue this, it's been an uphill battle, because I had asked this guy that I felt was, the moment I had asked him, like, hey, will you be like open to training me and teaching me how to facilitate? He like turned his back on me. Honestly, that's what happened. So then I started looking for someone else, and it hurt me deeply because I really, anyways. So I started looking for another practitioner, and out of all people in the world, the one guy in my life that he supports what I do, my dad, but he's not really like invested in any of this, and he's like, hey, I was in Mexico, and, I was talking to this guy about what you did, and he's like, he knows this guy that does facilitate something. And I was like, you should call him. So I got the guy's number. His name's, Victor. So anyways, I give this guy Victor a call, and I don't know what he facilitates, but he facilitates Bufo. So anyways, I go down to Mexico, and I asked him, would you be willing to train me? And this guy doesn't know me outside of me just meeting him for coffee at this point. And he's like, yeah, I'd be open to doing it. I've never done it before. He's like, I realized that there's no formal or traditional indigenous use of Bufo, right? There's communities in Mexico that adopted the use of the medicine, but historically, there's no traditional indigenous use, right? So I had gone down to get this formal training that wasn't existent, but basically his training to me was like, hey, sit with medicine, I'm going to have you sit with me 3 times, and I'm going to send you on, and basically I'll give you some medicine, I'll give you access to medicine, and, I'll help you out along the way. And I'll be honest with you, I go down there, I spend all this money, and I sit with him, and I remember I'm going through this final ceremony or whatever, and I had this very clear message in my head. I'm like, dude, you have to do this. Like you just have to do it. You have to make it accessible. That intuition was so strong in that moment. I'm like, I'm just gonna I'm even in that ceremony. I remember I'm having these reflections on even with martial arts, it was always 1 foot in, 1 foot out. You have to do this fully and just go. So I did, and I'm ready. I go home and I'm just gonna start doing this, and then I go and I'm back in California. I fly back to California, and this guy that facilitated my Ibogaine experience, I'm ready to go to Boston, and then he's like, something came up and it had to get pushed back. And then I was like, well, hey, I found this couple that wants to do Ibogaine. So then he had time for that. So he flew down to Sedona. They did the medicine. They go home. I'm like, hey, I got a buddy from jiu-jitsu. He's an active duty law enforcement. He had time for that. He comes down to California. Then boom. And then I just hey, I'm ready to come out. What's going on? And, I get this paragraph basically that says that he has to go MIA or ghost because the guy that he learned from, apparently they were facilitating Ibogaine. You could pull this up on Google if you want, but they had someone die during a treatment that they were facilitating in Colorado. From my understanding, there was like contraindicating substances involved, so there probably wasn't a proper screening done, whatever. And so basically he went ghost, like just out of nowhere. And I was extremely hurt because I'm like, I had like this whole plan in my mind that I was going to move to Boston. I was going to travel the country with this dude. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't care the risks associated with it. Like I was so committed at this point, and I wanted to do something that, I felt like intuitively called to do. And so he ends up disappearing, and I'm like, okay, so I'm training out of this martial arts academy. I train with all these vets and these first responders, and they all know me so well, and they see need a significant change, and they start asking me, and I'm like, hey, like, I don't have access to do Ibogaine, but like I just went and learned how to do this, and I'd be happy to facilitate it for you. Like I'm just starting out. Like I was very honest, and they trust me, and I, trusted the facilitator that was feeding me the information, to do it. So plans didn't happen with Boston, and then I just slowly started facilitating out of the academy, right? And then I'd have a guy like reach out to me like here and there. It was very like, spread out. And basically what happened is one of the guys I facilitated for, he's still a police officer. We do a ceremony for him, and he goes, man, why don't we, I'm using the Jiu-Jitsu Academy, by the way. So my instructor is like a second dad, and he's on board with it. So anyway, so I'm using the Jiu-Jitsu Academy. He's like, dude, why don't we go do this like outside? And I'm like, I would love to. I've only done it outside, but I don't know where to do it outside. And he's like, bro, I patrol like this section of this national park. I could take you on a ride along. We could go scout some spots. I'm like, okay. So after training the next day, he literally picks me up in his squad car, and we go look at these different areas, right? And he's like, what about this one? What about this one? I'm like, dude, this one. So this became like a hub for me where I started, right? So people were starting to drive out, meet me there, and just like little by little, like first it was him, then it was his lieutenant, sergeant, whatever, like then their wives and friends. And so it's like very like gradually building up. And then he planted in my head, he's like, dude, why don't you go down to an Ibogaine clinic in Mexico and like see like if you can get into the space and that through that avenue. So I was like, why not? So again, a lot of things happened, but I end up going down to Mexico. I start calling different clinics. I'm not finding like anyone that's looking to hire or bring anyone on. Through just consistency, I ended up getting connected with the owner of Ambia Life Sciences, right? And I remember I'm sitting with the owner, Trevor, and we're at this Starbucks, and I not once in this conversation, I just asked him, hey, I want to come work for you guys. Like I never mentioned anything about facilitating for whatever reason. And he's like, dude, we are growing, but I don't have an opportunity for you to work for us right now, but we are growing, so stay connected. So I was like completely discouraged because I had gone through probably every clinic you could find in that area of Mexico. So I'm like, all right, I guess I'm just going to go back home. And I never thought to like tell Trevor like, hey, like I'm facilitating, but Matt, we had recorded this one ceremony that I did in that hub in nature. And I had forwarded that message to Trevor, and he writes me back immediately. He goes like, is this you? And I said, yes. And he calls me, or he said something like, bro, call me right now, or something like that. And I'm like, okay. So we get on a call. He's like, why didn't you tell me this? And I'm like, I don't know, man. Like, fuck, I don't know. He's like, well, I don't have a need for you at the clinic right now, but interestingly enough, we have a documentary that is taking place that they want to do at our clinic, where this journalist who has a very large platform is coming down to do a segment specifically. She's doing a 3-part series, and one segment of that 3 parts is specifically for 5-MeO-DMT, and they're looking for a facilitator to administer to two veterans. He's like, do you want to do it? And I said, yeah. Sure, why not? I didn't even question it. Honestly, I will say I did question it because I had fear in that moment, right? But I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go. I made that promise to myself, so I said yes. So I go down to Mexico, and the it was CBS Morning News. They came down and they did a segment on me facilitating for 2 veterans. It got released on YouTube, and once it got released, it took off for me in terms of like how many people were contacting me to sit with medicine with me. So I found myself going up to this hub in California, like to facilitate like almost weekly, right? For maybe 4 people, 5 people, like it just kind of just fluctuating. And then about a month or 2, maybe, or however long, it got released. Trevor calls me. He's like, I remember this. He goes, do you still want to come work with us, or are you too famous now? And I said, no, I'd love to come work with you guys. So I came down, and then that's ultimately what led me to start working with Ambio, Life Sciences. When you're a guy that is so hungry and loves what he does so much, like you absorb knowledge so quickly. And I'm a guy that's excelled at really anything I applied myself to, even if I didn't like it, right? So when I started working in the Ibogaine space, I absorbed that like a sponge because I loved the work. I loved receiving groups week after week that I was relatable to. And I had all kinds of concerns because the house that I was running was known as the Sean Ryan House, the Sean Ryan podcast. And although my house wasn't specifically dedicated to veterans and military or veterans and first responders, that's primarily what I hosted because they had another house that was specifically for Special Forces veterans. So anyways, when I started working, I was shadowing, someone else. Within that same week, Trevor, he had come to have me shadow him facilitate the 5 because he wanted to see me do, like, I guess the way that they facilitated there, right? And after that first week, he's like, bro, you got this. Like, so basically, within 2 weeks or so, I was running my own house. I wasn't getting micromanaged to run my own house. And I loved it. And then shortly after that, I was managing one of the clinics. I was facilitating for about 6 people per week. And then I was also the facilitator for the house that received Special Forces veterans specifically. And then occasionally I was facilitating for the detox house of that. So at that time they had 3 clinics, and basically that was my role there. As we all know, I believe, if you don't know, now you're gonna know, Ibogaine is very expensive, right? It's not financially the most attainable for a majority of the population, right? I don't want to throw numbers because I don't know what it is now, but at that time I don't remember, but it's a lot of money, right? So a lot of people don't have access to go down to Mexico to do that. So 5-MeO-DMT is a much more frequently revisited medicine, right? It's very short-lived. It's very powerful. It probably provides so much more therapeutic benefit than we're even aware of because it's one of the most least common studied or currently least studied medicines to my knowledge, right? And I've done research on this. So people always seem to have a strong calling to do it again, right? But not like back to back or anything like that. But it's certainly not something you do once and you want to do it right. But it's like revisited. So when you're the on-site host, the guy running the clinic, you build bonds with people, right? You get, especially when I'm receiving these guys and I'm telling them like, hey man, I was sexually abused as a kid. So basically what that looks like is the group comes in and I'm supporting them through the week. And I start sharing my story. And then they, or men and women, man, if you hadn't shared that, I probably wouldn't have shared the fact that I was sexually abused as a kid or that I was physically abused and whatnot. So you build such strong bonds. And the fact that they're going through medicine, forget about it. And me facilitating for them, even more so, right? So then you build it and establish this sense of trust very quickly. So what ended up happening for me was meeting people from all over the States. I started getting asked and invited to facilitate, hey, we can't have them come to you. Would you ever be open to doing something out here in the States? And I said, absolutely, right? So I had hosted a group in California at this hub. I'll call it the hub because where I started, I guess. And several people that I connected with through Ambio had attended. And I remember a guy from Washington and a guy from Alabama. No, it was just a guy from, anyways. And I did this, and several people from out of state came to it and would you be willing to come to Washington? And I said, yes. So I go to Washington State, and then I come back home, and then I end up going to Alabama. Then I'm going to New York, Texas, Florida, like North Carolina. Basically, I was balancing both, but I have such a deep passion and love for facilitating Bufo that it got to a point where I wasn't able to balance both, right? Like it wasn't interfering at this point, but it got to a point where I was like, hey, you know what? I'm going to pursue where my heart is and my love in doing this work. And it was growing so quickly that I wanted to, just figure out a way to legitimize the work. That I decided to establish a foundation. I was doing a lot of retreats in Colorado. And basically I went out to Colorado. I got connected with an individual who helped me formulate and structure an organization for me to be able to facilitate the retreat stateside. So basically, ultimately what ended up happening is I was having this growing thing outside of the clinic. Some things took place, and I decided to part ways with the clinic to pursue this, and that's basically what I'm currently doing. As of recently, since you had mentioned it, I had an opportunity arise to get involved with another Ibogaine clinic down in Cabo San Lucas. About once a month, I'm bringing groups down to sit with Ibogaine and Bufo. It's very new, but it's an exceptional treatment that we're offering down there. So right now I'm still hosting retreats. Primarily that's my focus, but also doing work down in Cabo San Lucas as well for Ibogaine and Bufo.
So my experience with you, Juan, is a man on a mission and it makes sense that when you go in on something, you go all in, including opioids, but not anymore, right? So it makes sense that you go all in on whatever you do. And I've been able to witness you serve medicine. And I mean, I've told you this, but I really respect how you hold the medicine, how you don't overdose. You were singing, you were playing a flute. People can follow your Instagram. Bufo Stoic is your Instagram, and they can actually see some of the aftermath of some of the journeys, so they can see for themselves. But I've, experienced you, and as a friend, getting to know you, I just see you as a man on a mission. And yeah, I wanted to have you on this podcast because this foundation, which is Amor Fati, and people can find that. We'll talk about that in a second. But you're all over the U.S., and from my knowledge, your prices are very reasonable and affordable, because I feel like you come from your heart, and it's not a money-making thing for you. It's like you're truly here serving the people and serving the medicine, not literally you're serving it, but like serving what this medicine can do. So I just want to share that I have the utmost respect for you. I know you're pure love, and I love you so much. And
love you too.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Please share where people can learn more and maybe connect with you if they want.
Yeah, so I have a splash page for Amor Fati, but it has my email on there, so you can contact me on the email that's listed on there. It's amorfati.org. But generally, Instagram, as you said, Bufo Stoic, Bufo Stoic, Stoic. You can follow me on there, connect with me on there, and then, I'd be able to provide anything that's happening in the States for you. And, if you feel called to join, or someone that's in need that feels that they could benefit from the work I'm doing or that we're doing, they'd be greatly, it'd be an honor to host them and receive them.
Yeah. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I think your story, sharing your story, is sometimes the most powerful, and especially if people are on that path that you were on and they can get their hands on this, they'll know that there's hope, because like you said, your life was robbed from you. You feel like this medicine should have been available to you sooner. But there's always a timeline that we can't understand. So yeah, I'm hoping this will change lives, and thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you. Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thank you for letting me share. Appreciate it.
You have been listening to A Call to Healing. We hope Juan Aguilera's story reminded you that transformation is always possible. This podcast is supported by Senavida, a platform helping practitioners spend more time in service and less time in the back office. I am Melanie McDaniel, and until next time, many blessings to you.